Welcome back to the podcast. Jason Khalipa here with Adrian Conway. Thank you so much for being with us on the show. You know, normally it's Gabe Yanez, but it's like, dude, this week he's out at a Mets game, and it's like, hey, let's have Adrian on and let's chat it up.
Let's shoot it, man. I appreciate you having me on, man. It's always a good time we get together. So I love all the talk we explore, and I'm excited to get into some good stuff today.
Yeah, we were at the semifinals. You know, we were for lack of a better term, doing like a 3-hour podcast with the live events. And I was like, dude, I like talking to Adrian. Like, we're just kind of riffing it, bullshitting back and forth. And I was like, you know, we should maybe talk again on a more long form podcast like this. That's kind of what got me inspired was our connection, a couple weeks ago at the semifinals.
Yeah, it's crazy too, to me, man, that the time has flown by. I'm like, man, was that like 2 months ago? How long ago was that? Like, May for me was like a blur because I was involved in so many of those semifinals. But yeah, man, when we met up, of course, like our history in the space is that we've rubbed shoulders a lot. We've interacted a lot, particularly when you were back involved with some seminar staff stuff, like, you know, the annual get-togethers that we'd go on. But man, for us to come together on a 3-hour podcast and then just riff it the way that we did, I thought it was awesome. So I'm excited to be here with you, just chopping it up again. For sure, man.
I think when it comes to the semifinals, I'm curious, you went to two, or how many did you go to? You went
just two, the first 2 weeks. Yep.
Was there a difference in the two at all? Because was like from the East Coast to West Coast, was anything really different, or was the vibe similar, the size similar, or because not many people went to both. So I'm just curious.
Yeah. So week one was in Orlando for me. So that was the East, and it was big. It was large. And I say that like the whole venue, it was in a large venue. It was very spread out, but it was all in one central location. So it was like you walked 50 yards and there was the athlete warm-up area. There were booths for press and other stuff upstairs just over the athlete warm-up area. And then you walk back that 50 yards and that's where the competition floor was. And then you walk another 30 yards and that's where the secondary competition floor was. And then of course you walk maybe, 20 yards to the east, and that is where Vendor Village was. So it was all within this like really large space, which made it feel different because, and you were there in the West, Jay, where it was like, man, we were on top of one another in the competition area, but that's all it was. It was like really tight spots. The spectator venue and the competition floor was all in one area. In fact, there was only one competition floor, and they just ran it both ways, right? They ran a horizontal perspective for the large 20 athlete heats, and then they ran it the vertical perspective for the traditional 10 athlete heats. And then the downside,
I didn't pick up. Okay, now that you mentioned that, now I get it. Okay, got it. Yep.
So that was one of the biggest things with the competition floor and the setup. And then, of course, the vendors being away from everything else, I'm sure that hurt a bit of their experience. I always put myself in the investors' shoes, right? Like I'm like, yo, man, if I had to pay a couple grand to be here and I wasn't really getting to be central to where the spectators actually were all the time, I got to be like, oh man, we got to find a way to get them over here. We got to find a way to get them excited, of course. But I would have preferred that area be closer or more adjacent to or in the same building as the competition floor.
Yeah. Well, I mean, before we I definitely want to talk to you about, Dave Castro coming back. I want to talk about some leadership principles that you learned through team. But while we're on the subject of semifinals,
yep.
I think that there's people who watch the semifinals, or maybe there's at times, people get very invested in the CrossFit. It changed their life and whatnot, but it is a business. And I think that we have to recognize that from Dave coming back, from the semifinals and everything. So one thing that I think is interesting is I was talking to the team from NOBULL, right? And so NOBULL didn't have a setup, and people would look at it and be like, why wouldn't you have a setup? Like, I don't get it, blah, blah. But for NOBULL to show up the way they need to show up for their brand, I mean, dude, the booth build out alone is probably 50 grand, right? But what I'm curious about is when I was at semifinals, and I don't know if this is the same as in Florida, was there a way to buy a CrossFit semifinal shirt in Florida, or at neither of them could you buy a semifinal shirt?
I honestly don't think so. Yeah. But because I got to be honest though, because of my role and because how when we're with CrossFit or with the production team, we're like in and out of back doors. We're like, so I didn't get a full experience there in Florida because I was formerly on the broadcast team. Like, so some of the stuff that I got exposure to was like CrossFit's media room. I made a quick, run through Vendor Village on my way in and out a couple days. But other than that, I didn't see anywhere though, specifically, man, where you could buy a CrossFit semifinal shirt at all.
Yeah, I'm really curious if they're going to be at the games actually, because this is just my take on this from a business perspective. NOBULL signs a sponsorship partnership, and as part of that partnership, I imagine they're paying a royalty to utilize the mark of CrossFit on their merchandise, and then CrossFit gets back some type of royalty fee, right? And at semifinals, you figure CrossFit's assuming they're getting some additional revenue off the merch that's being sold there from the NOBULL vendor setup. But if NOBULL's not there, they're not also getting, not only are they not getting they're not getting that additional royalty. And so I'm curious with the games, if NOBULL decides not to have a booth set up, because I mean, as you and I both know, like for a vendor like NOBULL, they spend so much money because they have to show up in a certain way. It's like Rogue. Rogue would never show up like with a 10 by 10 tent, right? They're only going to show up legit, or they're not going to show up at all. And so I'm curious if they're going to be at the games. And if they're not, I wonder if actually another sponsor will jump in to take on those licensed products for people who want to get a CrossFit Games shirt. Like if NOBULL's not there, what shirt are you going to get? Like anyway, I don't know. I don't know if you know, but
no, yeah. I mean, I don't know a ton of details, but from what I do know, NOBULL will have a presence at the CrossFit Games, and they had to make some choices in regards to making sure that was going to be the case. So I think they called some audibles earlier on in the season with the lesser attended events there, and they were hard choices from what I know for the business to make, of course. But it's just like, this brings us to another conversation too, Jay, where it's like a lot of people make so many assumptions about running business or being the title sponsor of the CrossFit Games, and they just don't really understand the amount of money and investments of not just cash, but like your resources of your employees, someone that's planning this event, getting all the hotel rooms booked for people that are going to work the booth. And, like there's so much behind the scenes. And then the whole sole purpose is we want to get a return on our investment, right? Like, so what is the return going to be? And if NOBULL's struggling to see that return, and all these different things are things that of course are part of the conversation in their company, then they got to make some hard choices. And I think it's so easy for us to throw stones and be like, oh yeah, boo this, boo that. But it's like, man, I've been there. We were, as an FNX company, we had planned events that we were supposed to be a part of. And we were like, hey, right now, the way finances are playing out, we've got to call an audible. This is going to be best for the business. People are going to want to punch us or be really sad that we're not a part of this, but hey, we got to do what we got to do.
Yeah. And I think that those companies that continue to do things that are not driving a return, like they're just not going to be around. And, so speaking of that, this is a great segue into this. People look at CrossFit and some of the decisions that they're making, and they're like, oh, why are you doing this? Why are you doing that? And let's talk in particular about the expense of the CrossFit Games. I mean, think about this from a purely financial perspective. If you're broadcasting all of the events, I mean, I don't know exactly how much it costs to broadcast an event, but I know it's like a lot of money, like $100,000 to do, because you have to get multiple people, you have to get the bus out there, there's so many factors, right? Labor, not only just labor for the people who are actually like, commentating, but how about all the other people that are behind the cameras? And now you have multiple cameras. And I think that, for the CrossFit Games, this might be an unpopular opinion, but I think for the CrossFit Games, for them to really build something for the future and remain sustainable and grow, I think they should just focus on the individual athletes, maybe some team, and allow other events to highlight other athletes in a different way. And so here's what I mean by this, and you might disagree, and if you do, that's great. If the CrossFit Games want to continue to thrive or thrive, my struggle is that all these other divisions, I feel like they don't get the love, or they don't get the because they're not highlighted. They're highlighted, but they're not made at like, for example, the Masters. I've seen where the Masters are at, right? They're in like a secondary location, etc. My question would be like, would it be better off just saying, hey, look, the CrossFit Games are not going to be for the Masters divisions or the teams divisions or whatever. We're going to be for this cohort of people. And then we're going to set up events outside of this particular event to really highlight these people in a way that like that makes them feel like they are the show. They're not a part of the show. They are the show. You know what I'm saying? And that goes for adaptive and everything. Curious what you think about that.
Yeah, I think there's space for that conversation. And I think it's something that you've got to take a serious look at. You know, when we talk about allocating resources and the investment of time and cash or whatever it is, I mean, you hit the nail on the head with broadcast being like ridiculously expensive. Look,
Right.
CrossFit doesn't bring in like these amateurs to run cameras and do all this stuff. Bro, when I was back there last year, which was my first time back there with 10 freaking trucks back there, like, and people are like, hey, just so you know, this sounds crazy. This is the same setup that they use at the Super Bowl. And I was like, what? And you know, they're explaining this to me. And then I'm sharing vehicles in our Ubers to like the hotel and back from people that are like, yeah, I've worked 12 you know, major league championships. I've worked 6 Super Bowls. Like these are top tier in regards to medium production and entertainment. And so it's not cheap. That's the first thing. There has been so many new revelations like that I've been shown over the last year and a half being more behind the scenes that makes me grateful. I'm like, man, how have they afforded to continue to drive such high quality production? And I was like ignorant to it. Like I'm always thinking about how it needs to be better and how it needs to be improved. And I'm like, man, I should have been really grateful it was at the quality that it was at all. In regards to like the teams and the masters, I mean, look at some of these competitions that exist already, right?
Yeah,
like,
that's true.
They're nailing it in regards to allowing masters to potentially be the focus. And why not do a partnership with them specifically and do it at a higher level where it's like, yeah, hey, the Masters Championship is going to take place 3 weeks after all the semis wrap. You know, a month before the CrossFit Games. That gives nerds like me and obsessive people that want to be a fan of each aspect of the sport a chance to go watch it or to be a part of it in some way. The CrossFit Games can be solely towards the individuals and still maybe the teams, but also understanding that the broadcast might be a little different for the teams.
Right.
Right. Like I think about even the audible that CrossFit called that allowed us the opportunity to chop it up on our podcast segment, right, for events 1 and 3 out there, because they didn't broadcast them the same way, right? And I think about maybe that's the way that you tell the team story. Maybe you do save and allocate a little bit more funds to the individuals to highlight that, to make sure it's live, to make sure you can package it for ESPN or anyone else that wants to purchase that. And then the teams are, yes, more of a sideshow. Maybe there's one camera that captures a wide view, and maybe it's more of a podcast format, or just like you know, old school what's it like when kids just used to sit down to listen to the commentary man on the radio for baseball games, right? So I think there's options, and it's not going to be a flavor that everyone likes the taste of initially. Like we know that.
No, because I think the community will be upset. I personally think that in the next like 2 years, the community will be frustrated by what the games are going to have to do to remain sustainable, because they're so expensive. And I mean, if you're spending $100,000 to not only the money, it's the time and attention. So if you're saying, okay, we're the CrossFit Games and we're trying to really grow this thing into a professional sport, but you have so many groups you're trying to adhere to. What I struggle with is like, where is the time and attention being placed at? Is it being placed on these elite for the work or events? Is it being placed on the masters? Is it being placed on the teams? Is it being placed on the additional divisions? All I'm saying is that I think, yes, people will be frustrated because they're not going to be at the quote unquote CrossFit Games, but I actually think in the long run, it'll improve the athlete experience, the spectator experience, and the growth of the sport if each area just had its niche demographic they are going after. You know, it's something I think about a lot for our business. If we're trying to be everything to everybody, we're going to be nothing to anybody. We need to speak to a specific audience and speak to them the right way, and then have other, you know, and then there's places for other events. You know what I mean? So, anyways, I'm curious what'll happen. Speaking of which, so CrossFit yesterday. I don't know when this podcast will release, but yesterday I got an email from our buddy Austin Miliolo, and it says Justin Bergh is basically, in few words, Justin Bergh's out, Dave Castro's in. And I actually messaged Austin, full disclosure. I messaged Austin, I texted him, I said, hey man, good email, simple, effective, have a good day. I think that CrossFit in the past, you know, they're a business, they're an organization. I think sometimes they try and justify everything to everybody and maybe go a little bit more in depth into certain things. I think it just adds to confusion. I think
Yeah.
they just clearly communicated, hey, Justin Bergh is no longer in this position. Dave Castro is. And I don't really think they owe the community any more than that. Like, that's just my take on it. Like, I think it's just like, look, we're a business. We made this decision. Let's rock and roll. I don't know. What do you think? Do you think they should have done more or yeah?
No, man, I don't. I agree completely. I really have and it's just me being candid, sharing my own personal experience. Of course, I work with CrossFit and they hire me to teach seminars and do broadcasts, right? Like just full transparency there.
Right.
This is my opinion. I think that they should run it like a business that it is, and which means it is owned by a group of people and they get to make the choices now because they are the boss. It is their money. It is their baby. Now, it's a unique circumstance because of the community that we've built throughout the years, man. But when I look back on what Greg was able to do well was that when he said something, it was just the way it was, folks. And when Dave said something, it was just the way it was. And the more opportunity that we provided for people to argue or question or challenge, it just created more of those echoes and rumblings in the background, almost 2x, 3x, 4x. And while I think when they make a business choice that's hard to swallow, and I've experienced many of those, right? Like, oh man, I don't know if I like this move, right? Like that's how I feel. But then I also trust that if they're certain in their choices, well, this is what they deemed necessary. And I'll either find a way to follow suit or I'll make the choice to not be a part of it anymore. And I feel like that's the way they've got to be comfortable with presenting information is like, hey, this is the way it's going to be. This is why we deem that this is necessary. Hope you like it. If you don't, peace out.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, Don's had to make some tough decisions. You know, I met with Don. So he lives here in the Bay Area with me and not with in the Bay Area. And you know, he's been a member of the gym for years and years. And before he took the CEO role, I was talking to him. I was like, look, man, like, bro, this is gonna be tough. Like, there's gonna be a lot of like decisions you're gonna have to make that are gonna ruffle the feathers. And I think he knew what he was getting himself into. Probably not as much. Maybe I don't know. You'd have to ask him, but I think he had an idea of what he was getting himself into. That CrossFit has a long history, and there's a lot of people that feel very connected to it. But
no doubt,
you're gonna have a lot of tough decisions that need to be made, and I think this was one of them. I do think that if CrossFit, you know, my overall sentiment on this. I did like a small little podcast yesterday for a few minutes with Lauren. In general, my sentiment is if CrossFit chose to rehire Dave, right? And, you know, whether if CrossFit chose to rehire Dave, because remember, he got let go, right? Then he got rehired. And he got rehired as like, I think at the time it was like, he was reporting to the CEO or then he was doing like auxiliary revenues and he was doing a few different things, right? Like kind of, he was doing a lot of stuff with the Army. Maybe he was doing some of the affiliates. I think that if they chose that, hey, Dave is going to be on the team, that's the decision. Well, then I think this is a natural fit for him if he's on the team. So like, imagine you have, 10 players on your starting lineup. If you chose that he was going to be with you, this is probably where he should have been. Like, I don't know if the role of auxiliary revenue or, assistant to the CEO or advisor to the CEO, I think that was the original role. I don't think those were as up his skill set. If you just looked at it objectively, then this is. So, you know what I'm saying? Like if they chose that he was going to be on the team for the long run, this sounds like a natural fit for him in there.
Yeah. And I agree with you, man. So, and even some behind the scenes stuff is that Dave was becoming more involved back with seminar staff again, which I was absolutely ecstatic about, right? To have that voice and that face kind of leading the charge for us. And now that he's going to be a part of sport, clearly I'm still involved with sport as well, which again, excites me to the nth degree. But I feel like, and I think people will understand when they hear me say this and what I mean, but like Dave Castro is a leader of men. And it's very natural that when Dave comes into a room or he's speaking, whether he is the most eloquent dude there or he's not, right, with his presentation or his chicken scratch handwriting, like all of that is irrelevant. But it seems like he has a unique ability to help people fall in line and want to pursue a greater cause, right? I think that this was the advantage that he carried for many years as the face and voice of our sport. And I think the community related really well to that, even if it was him sharing something they didn't want to hear, or him acting as the villain in regards to announcing workouts that were going to just kill everybody. Like he played the role so well and we became very familiar. I think we all actually desired that that role for him to fill to a degree. Now, I don't know if this is what it will look like with his return to the head of sport. I don't know if it will be as front facing as he once was, especially with now Boz still being the head programmer, at least from what we know. I don't know how they will balance one another out, but I think that, you know, for me, his return, I'm extremely excited about. And I know that it is also, and I shared this even as I reached out to Justin about his transition away from CrossFit. Like I thanked him tremendously for filling in roles that are very overlooked and also undervalued. Like he has to make a lot of really hard choices that a lot of people are going to constantly disagree with or have better suggestions to. And now Dave taking on that responsibility and kind of having the reins back to him. It's going to still be what we would categorize as a pretty thankless role, right? Like he'll be back, and then what are people going to do? They're going to criticize him,
of course,
for the next choices that he makes. And we get that. We know that. We've been in the game for a minute. But man, I'm excited. And I think that, you know, it will push the space and the sport continually forward. And, you know, I did watch already what you recorded the other day with Lauren, Jason, and I love that your focus has to be on the consumer and the fan.
Yep.
Because to me, as an athlete, I'd love for the focus to be on me, sure, but I know what's going to give me the opportunity to compete, bro. And that's with butts in the seats and eyes on me competing.
That's
so
right.
I think those have to be some of our first considerations in regards to growing this sport. Is let's get people excited. And let's get new eyeballs on these athletes out there in our sport.
Dude, I agree 100%. Like my heart is in the growth for the athletes and new sponsors, more money, more growth. And I just haven't seen that in the last couple of years. I just don't feel like there's been any growth. Yeah, the open is a little bit better, but it's like, I feel like in general, the sport of CrossFit is stalled out in general. And it reminds me a lot of like two things I'm reminded of. I used to race BMX bikes, and it's just such a good example because I would go to these national events and they'd fill up, you know, like a small like cattle stadium, right? But they weren't like, they were never going to get bigger than that. Like that was just where it was at. Or I used to be involved in the X Games and the not involved. I used to go. And the X Games were just what they were. Like that was what it was. And the thing is like, I think what made it appealing when you had people transcend the sport, just get bigger and pull people in, was like the Tony Hawks of the world who created a video game, who then people started getting interested in this. But from a CrossFit perspective, I look at it very similar to jiu-jitsu. And this is why I have my own opinions about Dave. With jiu-jitsu, you know, I've been a fan for many, many years. I've been practicing jiu-jitsu for about 7 years. I absolutely love it. But I'm not like a diehard sports fan. Like I've showed up at like one or two of the events. I've competed myself. So maybe I'm like more than like just on the fringe. But what this guy, Gordon Ryan, has done, have you ever heard of this guy, Gordon Ryan, before?
I don't know that I have.
Okay. So you got to look him up because he's super polarizing. And because he's so polarizing, if you look at like his 1 million social media followers on Instagram, I'd say that 30% of them don't even do jiu-jitsu. And it's interesting because of how polarizing he is. Like he'll show up to a match and he's undoubtedly the GOAT. Like it's non-negotiable in a no-gi. And what he'll do is he has theatrics. So he'll show up and he'll write on a piece of paper how he's going to submit his opponent, put it in an envelope and give it to like the commentator, right?
Yes.
And then he'll do it, blah, blah, blah. And then he'll win. And then he'll have the commentator open up what he says and do, you know, arm bar from mount, whatever, right? And it just adds these theatrics where even if you're not a diehard jiu-jitsu guy, you want to see him, you either want to see him back up his hard work or you want to see him lose because you want to be able to talk shit or whatever. And I feel like we need something like that in CrossFit to help bridge the gap between you have the diehard crew, I got it. You have these people who are like on the fringes, like they know what CrossFit is, what's going to attract them. And I talked about this on the podcast with Lauren. Dude, do you remember that one open announcement where Dave was like drinking red wine, wearing a suit? Oh, yeah. And he did a cold muscle up in Paris.
That's right. Of course.
London, yes. Or wherever it was.
Yeah.
So it was stuff like that at the time I was like, bro, it's so over the top, like whatever. But I didn't realize I was in my own bubble. Like looking back on it, and even today, I'm like one step removed from the sport. I'm slowly getting back into it a little bit more because things like commentating and like I'm getting intrigued. Like it just took me a little while to kind of like
Yeah.
but like when I was so in it, I was like, dude, I know all the competitors, I know all the people, just give me the event and I'm ready to go. But now as I'm like kind of like one step back, I'm like, bro, I kind of want to see a little bit of like anticipation, what theatrics we're going to see, what villain, the Dana White effect.
That's right. Yeah. And I think Dave has that right now. I don't know what his role be like. Look, I'm over here saying quiet prayers like, come on, man, get back in front of the camera. Give us a little bit of that. Like we need that. My heart misses that personally. And it's interesting because like I don't even know if Boz presented with that opportunity, and I'm speaking on his behalf, right? Like out of order here. I don't know if he wants that necessarily, right? No. Like I don't know if he actually wants that side of it, but either way, like I think Dave does do that in droves, man. And I think you're hitting the nail on the head with like we need to continue to tell stories. We need to be storytellers. Media has to be a huge part of this moving forward. I mean, it's the whole reason, dude. I went to CrossFit just about a little less than a year ago and was like, hey, I started this podcast, Athlete to Athlete. I'm just sitting down with these athletes. I don't know if you guys have ever any interest in like telling the story of the athletes, but to me, like I think about looking back on when you were just primed in your career, bro, and like thinking about the way cameras would come follow you guys for like a week or a couple days and like tell the story of it. I forget exactly what we called those.
Like Road to the Games.
Or Road to the Games. That's the series, right? I think about those and the mass amount of views they would get, the way they make the athletes human and relatable. You saw them sit down to dinner or prioritize the day or have ups and downs in training, whatever it was. I mean, we've got so many people within this 40 and 40 tier of individual athletes that are now going to the CrossFit Games, right? The stage is set. Their backgrounds are diverse. The way they look is diverse. How much they train, the way they train, their coaches. If we start telling those stories better, imagine the random people outside that'll be like, oh, I kind of see myself in that guy.
Yeah.
Oh, I kind of see myself in that girl. Man, that's cool. He talks so much trash and I freaking love it, right? Like there's all these different things, but it's all contingent upon how we tell the story, the investment we're willing to make and roll the dice on that side of the business. Because I mean, you remember the large exodus that took place in 2018 and you had kind of, more so removed yourself from what was going on in the sport. But when media got removed from what we are and what we were, boy, that really changed things for a huge swing. So I think if we can get back in that and we got Dave under the fold and leading the charge, man, it could be powerful.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, people want to feel connected to the athletes. And well, here's the nice thing about for Dave. And Dave and I, again, for the record, I worked for CrossFit seminar staff. So I worked underneath him. I worked with, I was at his ranch. I still see him on a regular basis. So we have a strong relationship, and that relationship has had ebbs and flows, just like any relationship, but ours has been what you see is what you get with Dave, which I really appreciate. Like if he has an issue, he'll let you know. I think that's a very admirable, quality, right? I also think that now that Don and there's a board of directors, I think that they're going to give him a little bit more checks and balances. I think before he didn't really have that. And frankly, no one's ever said he didn't want that. Meaning like, I don't know if Greg ever gave him guidance and direction on the CrossFit Games. Frankly, it probably went the opposite way where he's like, look, I'm not that interested in it. And maybe Dave, and I'm not going to speak for him, but maybe it was a part of him that wanted some more guidance on, hey, where are we trying to build this thing? I feel like I'm alone on this journey. And now he has a full team that's invested into growing it for the future, because I know that Don sees the sport as a major marketing opportunity for CrossFit. I mean, he's been pretty clear on that since day one. So bringing Dave in, I think they're going to make some investments. We have to see what they do, but I think they're going to have to make some tough decisions, Adrian, like in particular with broadcasting. Like, are they going to broadcast everybody? Is it going to be for everybody, or are they just going to storytell on these 40 athletes from all over the world? Because all of a sudden you have a lot of stories across many, like you have all these teams, all these individuals, all these different divisions. How can you storytell on everybody? It's gonna be tough.
Man, it's so hard. It's so hard. I love teams, right? Like, hey, I've won the CrossFit Games 3 times on a team. I love it so much. However, bro, when I get on the mic and I'm like talking about what's happening out there on the floor, and I'm trying to highlight you, Jason Khalipa, but also, the athlete Gabe on your team, like he's actually the one that picked up the bar, but I had to look in reference to make sure it was your face that I wanted to mention. By the time I'm getting ready to talk about you, all of a sudden it's Gabe's turn again, and the camera's on Gabe, and it's like it is so hard to tell the story at volume and do it well for the teams. I'm not saying we got to axe that or anything, but it's just, boy, it presents some very, very unique challenges, especially when it comes to priority and thinking what really does draw people in to have interest and want to watch more or go visit an affiliate themselves.
Yeah, man. I mean, at the end of the day, I think the goal for everyone should see more eyes come onto the sport. And those aren't the same eyes that they are today. And if they are, then we're not doing our job. Like, dude, if you're an OG CrossFitter, you're going to continue to be involved in the CrossFit Games. You're going to be engaged on the semis. Like, that's fine. But we've already spoke to that demographic so hard. So for any of those people who are even listening right now, like, dude, you're already in. Think about how we're going to get to the next layer, the next circle right outside. And it's probably not through these, it's probably storytelling on these people like with unique backgrounds who are competing as individuals. It's just the way it goes. Like, and I can't think of another sport. Tell me if I'm wrong here. Can you think of another sport that at the highest expression, they have as many divisions?
No, definitely not.
At the highest expression. So like,
right. No.
Speaking from a jiu-jitsu perspective, right? It's actually one of the things I think is tough because you have weight class, belt class, age class, and then obviously male, female, right? I mean, so it makes it tough because there's just a lot going on. But at ADCC, which is like the Olympics, it's just like there's a few weight classes, like 3 or 4, and that's it. Like, let it ride. You can be as old as you want, as young as you want. I don't know. Maybe not as young as you want, but you know what I mean?
Yes.
But it's an interesting thought that at the highest level, can you think of another sport that when the expression is televised or when the expression is brought to life at the highest level, they are also speaking at the same time about 40 other divisions?
Yeah, no, man. Nothing. I mean, I'll even go brainstorm it for another hour and I don't think I'd find anything. Right. So the answer is no.
Yeah. I mean, I was just something I was thinking about, like gymnastics, right? Like you're going to have the best in the world. Weightlifting, you're going to have the best in the world. Like you might have different, weight brackets, but they're not going to have like a division where, well, I mean, like, no, like at the Olympics, there's no masters division, right? It's just, I'd have to go look at it, but it was just something on my mind.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. And again, this kind of highlights that maybe at the games, it's the indies and we're able to storytell and bring other people to more of a highlight in themselves by having a separate event altogether.
Yeah. I think in the grand scheme of things, though, it's actually better for the athletes because they could be the show. Okay, so switching gears a little bit, I want to ask you a question. So I competed on a team, and it's definitely different dynamics than competing individually. You've won the CrossFit Games 3 times on a team. I was recently at a Echelon Front. This is like months ago. Echelon Front is a leadership group that was developed by Jocko and his team. So all of them are either former Special Forces, former Navy SEALs, et cetera.
Yep.
So you go out in the middle of nowhere and you play laser tag. And I know it sounds weird, but basically you have 40 guys or girls and you are each given a different like role. So like, for example, I was the, officer in charge one time. Then I was the third in command one time. Then I was a nobody. I was just like a whatever. And you would go out on a mission and they would see the way that communication was done from the top down. And they put you in a pressure tested environment. So they're throwing smoke grenades, they're putting firecrackers, they're playing loud music. So trying to get you frazzled to see how your natural tendencies of leadership come out when you're in these environments. Mm-hmm. And so I'm curious, you've been pressure tested on a team, whether it was in training, whether it was in practical application at the games. What type of principles, like what kind of things have you seen? I'll give you one example. Something I'm working on is this idea of detachment, where when something happens, trying to detach from my ego, my emotion, and my perspective. So at times you're on team, maybe someone drops a bar, whatever it is, and you want to kind of you're emotional. You're like, dude, why are you dropping the bar? Or your ego gets in the way. Like, we're gonna lose because that. But maybe that person's perspective is, bro, like my grip shot, whatever. I think if I had just taken a breath and just kind of toned it down, I would have been able to better communicate with that person instead of acting emotionally. So what type of things did you see on a team, and any like leadership lessons that came out? Because at the time, if I'm not mistaken, you had 6 people, and then did you flow down to 4? Is that what it was?
Okay. No, so I was on Ute CrossFit's team with Hackspack, right? So Tommy Hackenbrook, he was our captain for sure. So 2012 and 2013, we won back-to-back years. Then I would go on for the next 3 years to pursue individual competition at the games, which I only made it once. So 2015, and I finished 21st there. And then 2016, I missed
the Murph that year, right?
That's right, yeah. Which was my best finish of the games. Finished 7th that year in Murph. But we went, so like, you know, and then I went into 16, missed out, and then 17 team again, but that was the last 6. That was so 2017 when we upset the Mayhem there at the CrossFit Games. That was the last year for 6 teams, and then, you know, the next year it was 4-person teams. So bottom line is, man, you know, I'm thinking back to all these experiences that I've had, and I'm very fortunate. So I've been able to play a lot of team sports growing up. I was a 2-year captain at Weber State University here, where I played football. And that's all like peers vote you into that, right? That role. It's not the coaches that decide, it's the team. And you know, leadership for me, I've done a really bad job at trying to communicate and or scale the qualities of successful leadership. I've never really took time to think back and think through, like, what are these aspects or attributes. But there's a couple that stand out to me. And the first one is, you know, on a team to be successful, whether you're leading or you're following or you're third in command or fourth in command, you do have to know your role. So I think, you know, understanding your role on the team, no matter where it is, you need to have an understanding of that. And sometimes that can be built through communication with the squad. Like, hey, where do I fit here? What is my role at this time, you know, in our evolution or whatever we're going to do as a task? And that might change in the CrossFit Games. Sometimes I had the role of calling the repetitions, right? If I was in the middle of the worm, for example, I'm calling all the reps. The people in front can hear me. The people in back can hear me. If I had to switch and carry the brunt of the load, which, Jay, you'll remember how devastating the front of the worm can be. I would have to be at the front carrying more of the workload. So my other teammates, one of our females or one of our other males, would have to be the counter. So I think, you know, you got to know your role, because it's important to understand whether you're going to follow or whether you're going to lead. The next thing is self-awareness. And for me, like, self-awareness is what you're communicating as detachment, where I know how I feel right now. But in order for me to communicate to Jason successfully, I can't just let it rip. I've got to actually have the awareness and the wherewithal to kind of like communicate it to him the way that he needs to see me present it.
Right.
So it's like, if I feel panicked and I'm frustrated, and what I need you to do is be able to perform under pressure, I can't present it frustrated and panicked. I need you to feel calm and collected, and you need to feel trust from me that you can execute at the highest level, bro. You need to be able to step up to that bar. I'm gonna say, hey, Jay, you've hit this time and time again in practice. All you got to do is go be you out there. Grab the bar, get tall before you get small. Let's go. Like, I give you one cue and then you're out there, right? Like, but you feel like, cool, I got one thing to focus on. Adrian, trust me, my team's relying on me, but I've done this before. And for me, those two things like really stand out, like, is just natural right off the tongue, is, you know your role, and then have the self-awareness to understand the way that you're presenting to other people. Yeah. So those other two things. I hope that answers your question.
Bro, I mean, those are great, because I mean, I don't know many people in the CrossFit space, actually, to be honest. I mean, well, Froning would be an exception, who have, I mean, you've competed individually, you've also competed on team, and you've had the success you've had on a team. And then you also played more traditional team sports before that, where it's one thing to be a leader on a team of 6. It's another thing to be a leader on a team of 40 or 50 or however many guys you have on your team, right? There's a big difference in the way you lead and each personality. You know, I remember on our team at NorCal, each person needed to be kind of inspired, motivated, or guided in a different way. And that was a big lesson that I learned, was like, the way that I talk to you might not be the same way that I talk to somebody else. And I need to meet them where they're at, you know, maybe more compassionately, maybe more like rah, like maybe, maybe you didn't need me to put my arm around you and be like, hey man, like you're doing great, whatever. All you wanted was like, let's go. Like, and I think that those kind of conversations are necessary because they translate into real world really well. I mean, for you, I imagine whether it's through the supplement company, the gym you're a part of, or even with your family, you know, with two kids and your wife, like you could take the idea of know your role or self-awareness, which, you know, the self-awareness is a very good analogy to this idea of detachment because they're almost the same thing. Like one of them, like, you know, the best example I have, you know, an athlete shows up late for class, right? 10 minutes late. And your ego gets in the way because you think that they're like disrespecting your time. And you're emotional because you're in the middle of teaching a class and all of a sudden this person throws you off. And your perspective is this person is, you know, not respecting my time. They think they're better than everybody else, whatever. But if you just like had some self-awareness, like that person probably doesn't come in late all the time. And if they do, you need to have a conversation with them offline. And if you just approach with a level of care, you might find out that that person who's 10 minutes late, instead of yelling at them and having to do burpees, you might find out that, you know, maybe they had car trouble or maybe they whatever. And you should just be grateful they're even in the gym, you know?
That's right.
So, but it's that piece, I think sometimes it gets in the way. And I'm speaking from, you know, experience for me, especially when your emotions get in the way, man. It's tough. Like,
oh yeah. Yeah. It's very tough. And I think that like, it's interesting because of course I've been on teams and like I shared like 2012 and 2013, like Tommy was for sure our captain and our face, and he was our leader, you know, but at that time I didn't feel incapable of leading, right? Like I just knew my role. So like what he said was going to be what it was going to be, right? CrossFit was his affiliate. He was the one that had finished second at the CrossFit Games. Before, like he had the experience and he's the one that put our team together, but in the same right, like I always was aware of what I could do to support him the best that I could. Right. And like acknowledging that I was going to be second or third in command and like wearing that with pride, even though I was a follower, like to me was okay. And I don't know, sometimes like type A personalities and, you know, strong character individuals sometimes have a hard time at doing that. But bro, if I'm being honest, like even from a business perspective, if I had to be first in our business, or if I was like, hey, I need to be CEO and call all the shots because of my pride and my ego, FNX wouldn't exist still. Like it just wouldn't, right? Like I'm just being honest. And so my self-awareness to like take second and third and even fourth in moments when it's needed, like in my life, even sometimes with parenting to my wife, it's saved me in a lot of ways. So I think that's something also that people got to consider with leadership is like, yo, you can do it by serving and not always being the face of the franchise.
yeah, I mean, you know, and if you're like leaning into Jocko's concepts, you know, it's this idea of taking ownership, right? Taking extreme ownership and recognizing what you're good at, what you're not good at, and kind of taking a moment, you know. I mean, at least in our house, you know, I think, you know, my wife and I, we met really young. And so we've kind of grown our relationship as we've gotten older and matured, right? But we each play different roles. I think just communicating and having that self-awareness, I think is key. And knowing that role. And that role can pivot back and forth depending on what you're doing, how it's going. Like you said, man, I mean, you've been in countless events. Do you remember? Well, the team in 2015, you did Murph. You said you took seventh that year in that event?
Yeah. Uh-huh.
How the hell did you take seventh? Bro, you're like, how much do you weigh right now? Or how much did you weigh then?
Probably like 202 or something like that. Not that heavy.
Bro, how are you gonna 202? So I did a workout yesterday. We're doing like a mid-year mini comp at the gym where it's like just like 3 fun workouts. And I haven't done, I was doing 28, 22, 16, 10, but fast pull-ups. And my biceps are sore from that as is. How the hell are you doing Murph? And I remember it was hot that year, dude.
Super hot, bro.
Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you, be honest, it was self-awareness. I believe that most of my success in the fitness space, Jay, is not because I'm fitter than a ton of the other guys. It's because their pride got in the way. And guess what? There were guys that ran like a 6:30 first mile of Murph. And I was like, peace out, see ya. And I came in like, I think like around 34th on the first run. And I just was chipping. I also did 5s on the pull-ups to get to 100. And then I just started eating them up on the push-ups and squats. And then on the last mile, I remember passing. I know I passed Ben and I passed a few other guys. Ben stands out because, of course, he won the games that year.
Oh, yeah.
So
yeah.
there were a few guys that I was able to run down on that run, but a lot of it, like the success to that event was for me, like self-awareness. I just knew where I was fitness-wise, and I was really worried when everybody went out super fast on the run. I was like, great. Like I've been working with Hinshaw, I've been working with all these other dudes, and I'm like, great. Now I'm clearly not fit enough to be here, is what I was thinking initially. And then I was like, no, I'm going to trust the process here. And so I just let it play out, and it finished really well for me. And it was the same thing, bro. That night we did heavy DT, and heavy DT I got 8th on. And so those 7th and 8ths were like 2 very different tests. And to me, I was really proud of that, because there were guys that came out and at 205, they're slanging and banging it and kind of going unbroken on the first round. They drop the bar, but the hands are on the knees and they're blowing themselves up, right? And I just was like, cool, I got this game plan. I'm breaking things up here. I'm breaking things up there. I'm going to roll the bar forward, take a breath, but I'm picking it up again to start the next round. And so because I trusted the process and then kind of met myself where I was, it played out really good for those tests. But yeah, I think that's the self-awareness. I know for a fact that I probably could have gotten 15th in both of those workouts, but instead, I finished where I was because a lot of those other guys weren't willing to start slow and build that intensity throughout.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things about having a game plan. I think for athletes in particular, it's like beforehand, you talk to your coach, you come up with a game plan, and you come up with a game plan based on the information you have, and like you should be sticking to that as well as you can. Now, obviously, there's exceptions. If you have a minute left or 30 seconds left, you got to go, right? But there's a reason why you came up with the game plan, because you thought about it methodically when your heart rate wasn't at 180 beats a minute, and you're not freaking out because there's another competitor next to you. You came up with your plan because that was the best plan at the time for you to think you're going to win, right? And that's something I had to learn the hard way in CrossFit. Is like, you'd be going out, man. There was always that guy who just went out, and you had to remind yourself, like, that dude's going out too hot. And every blue moon I would get proven wrong, every blue moon. But in general, if you stick to your game plan, you're going to perform better. But with 30, 45 seconds left, you got to go. I saw that at semifinals. I think that,
oh yeah,
I actually did, I did a small little talk about this, was like this idea to, like, dude, for some people, man, they go out there and like, they just, man, like if they just ran through the line, if they just did like this much more, they could have made a different placing. It's like, I wonder if that eats up with them, because that's something that's ate me up in the future, was like, dude, I could have, if I had just done this, and those regrets are tough.
Oh man, they're so tough. And that's one thing that I try to preach to my athletes all the time, is like, never look back on this journey, right? Never look back and wish you would have done something more, right? Like, commit to it fully, like be invested, be afraid to lay it all on the line, whatever it is you're doing, training, food, sleep, recovery, and like, be willing to be embarrassed that you weren't good enough. Like when people ask me about like my football career, like I literally say like, yo, just want to be honest, guys, I'm here with you because I wasn't good enough to be an NFL football player. And nothing in my pride hurts me to say that, because when I look back, bro, I did everything I could in college to like ball out and to stay healthy, and it didn't work out for me, but I tried my best, and I'm not embarrassed to say that. It was kind of the same thing when we were like getting ready for the games in 2017 to compete against Mayhem. We had a hashtag Stop the Mayhem, right? And we created this hashtag like 2 months before the games, and all these people were like, man, these guys can't stop the mayhem. Like, who is this dude to like make these claims? But we did it because we had gotten together as a team solely to win the CrossFit Games. And we weren't going to be embarrassed if we took second to them, because that was our whole goal, was to take first. And we were going to lay it all on the line, willing to do that. So I think there's, a lot of people are afraid to try their best and then fail. And that's what holds them back optimally, in the big picture, is because they're not willing to fully commit.
Dude, that's such a good perspective from your football career. And I feel the same way with my CrossFit career. For me, I look back, there has been like one event in particular stands out where I don't feel like I did what you just said. And it was in the 2012 like final event of Fran. I ended up taking 5th that year. I wonder if I had just put out my better effort, if I could take in 4th. And that's the only thing that sticks out. But when I look back on my career as a whole, right, you just want to ask yourself, like, did I reach my potential? And I think that I think about that as a father a lot. Like, dude, I don't want to look back like when the kids are like 20, 30, 40, whatever they are, right, and be like, dude, I didn't reach my potential. I could have done better there. So I try and do these micro check-ins. I think they're helpful, because especially when you're competing in CrossFit, for me, like my journey was dictated for me when Ava got sick. Like my journey was chosen, that I was exiting from the sport. It was just going to happen. And you never know when that's going to happen. But I look back on my career and I have no regrets, man. I feel like I reached my potential there, kind of like what you're talking about with football. And I think about that same thing with business and with the family. It's like, bro, how much of that sucked when you're like 60 and be like, you know what? Kind of messed up that whole dad thing,
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Especially with how fast time goes to us, bro. Like, it's just like, you feel like you're in one phase of life and all of a sudden that phase is over. And then I'm like over here right now saying like, oh my gosh, we got no babies no more. Like our kids are like growing up, or, it's just, it's crazy how fleeting time is and how hard it is sometimes to really capture the moment that you're in. Cause especially men like yourself, men like myself, women that are type A, like anybody that's focused on driving the needle and like becoming the best version, like we're so focused on what's next instead of looking around at what's here in front of us or what's around us right now. And it's challenging.
For sure, man. Yeah, I leave on Sunday. I'm going to Europe for close to a month to celebrate Ava being cancer free, and
Oh, it's going to be
she's
amazing.
12. So like, bro, it's just like that, right? Um,
Crazy.
bro, we could chat all day long. I do want to be sensitive of your time, and I wanted to ask you.
Yeah.
We do this YETI question of the week, right? And every week we give out, we put on social media, and we hand out like a ramp, like a YETI water bottle, for lack of a better
Mm-hmm.
term. And this question is, how many days a week do you train? Are you ever worried about overuse or burnout? And I mean, dude, you've been training hard for a really long time. I've been training hard for a really long time.
Yep.
I've obviously pivoted some of my training to now incorporate quite a bit more jujitsu. But I'm curious, in your side, how many days a week do you train, and are you ever worried about burnout?
Man, this is a really great question, and I'm not worried about burnout because I'm not training to compete and win things anymore, right? So when I was training to compete and win things, this was a great risk for me. And not burnout mentally because I was always very driven to pursue whatever I was chasing, but physically, like the literal limitations that my body has physiology wise, like I wanted to push those every single day. And it took some really hard lessons, man. I got injured 3 days before the 2014 regional, doing ring dips. I tore my pec.
Oh, I
Right.
think a
Like,
few people had that. Was that year? Yeah.
yeah,
Okay. Yeah.
it,
Yeah.
it happened to a few people.
Yeah.
And that was the fittest I'd ever been. And I bring this up, Jay, because for me, when I'm competing and I have this external motivator, like it's very hard for me to rationalize and say, yo, I need to take today off. Yo, I need to rest. Yo, you know what? I should probably just do some erg work today and let my muscles recover, let my joints recover. So a lot of my competitive career, man, and I take these lessons into the athletes that I work with today to try to teach them these lessons, is that I needed someone to tell me to back off and chill out. Now at this phase of my life, it's very different. I want to continue to get stronger. I want to continue to get fitter, but also I'm willing to listen to my body more. So if my knees are achy and I planned on squatting, you know what, bro, I'm gonna do some good mornings instead, or I'm gonna do some power cleans instead. I'm not gonna pass below parallel today. I'm gonna call that audible. For me to answer your question directly, I train 5 to 6 days a week. I try to hit some good intensity 4 to 5 of those days. One of the days I try to keep about a zone 2. I'm going on a long run, or I'm going to do some erg work or whatever, maybe a hike. And then one day I try to take completely off. But I'll also mention May was crazy. I was on the road all the time, right? Like I didn't spend more than 3 to 4 nights in a row here at my home. Just because we had an FNX retreat this last weekend. I had the 2 semis, like a lot of stuff. I taught a seminar. And with that being said, I trained when it was available to me. So instead of worrying about my schedule, bro, the last week I was just training when I could. So if that meant 20 minutes downstairs in a hotel with some dumbbells, I was getting it in. And if I did that 7 days straight, I was going to roll with it because I knew I was only getting in, 15 to 30 minutes of high quality stuff. So I listen to my body. I avoid redundancy by trying to switch it up often. And I've got some good programs online that I can pull from too. We got a great True 30 program that exists through Train to Rise Up that I can just pull some workouts from. So that helps me too.
Yeah, man. I think my training split, I go 3, 4 days a week, classes at our gym. I do 3 days a week of jujitsu. Any more than 3 days a week, it's too much for me. Today I'm actually going to a local police department and enrolling jujitsu with them.
Yes.
And it's hard to reduce your RP, like your rate of perceived exertion. Like it's hard to regulate that as well in jujitsu, just because I talk about detaching from your ego. It just starts to get in the way. I mean, if you're having good rolls with someone, like, dude, the endorphins are flowing. You're like, all right, let's go,
That's right.
and the vibes are right. But all of a sudden, you're like, shit, that's like multiple days in a row I've been hitting it. So for me, I try and regulate, like the CrossFit, the classes that I take, try and adjust a little bit. So like 4 days a week there, 3 days a week jiu-jitsu, and then in general, some days I'll do both, right? And then in general, I do like one longer, like I like to bike. And I don't really find myself like doing nothing in a day. Oftentimes on Sundays, I'll do self-defense Sundays with the kids.
Oh,
And
that's
so,
awesome.
yeah, that'll just be me getting in some movement with them. Like, we're working some Thai pads, we're working some grappling, we're working some of that. So I'm still getting some movement in, but I'm not like getting after it. But I think you're right, man. It is, if I could look back and if I could give myself some advice from, 10 years ago when I was really at the height of the sport, I would have said, hey man, sometimes less is more. You don't
Yeah.
need to do, like, I remember we used to warm up. I used to warm up doing filthy 50 just as a warm up, just to like get the body moving. We would do 5 rounds of Fight Gone Bad just to kind of, get the primer going. Anyways,
No, man,
hindsight's
listen,
2020, man.
Yeah, it is. In hindsight's 2020, bro, we love fitness so much. We're essentially addicted to the physiological responses that we get, right? So we're like a dog, with someone dangling a toy in front of our face, the tail starts to wag. Just like you're saying, when you start to roll with someone and it's like, nah, man, this feels right. And you're just gonna go with it. It's like me walking into the CrossFit gym and being like, Jay, I'm resting today, man. Don't worry. I know you're doing your workout. I'm not gonna do it. You know what that's gonna turn into. I'm doing the workout too. I was supposed to be resting. It's because I'm drawn to the competitive nature or the physical feeling when it's all done. So I totally get it, man. And yeah, hindsight's 2020. It's interesting though, when I do look back, I'm like, if I'd have rested a little more in my competitive career and not like made myself train less, but just trained a little smarter, I think I'd have been stronger. I think I'd have been a touch more powerful in the shorter time domains, so that's all stuff to consider. But I got a question for you. Like, at this stage of your life, are you a big like heat and cold guy? Are you in a sauna every day? Are you in a cold plunge? What's that look like for you?
Yeah, so I'm in the sauna probably 3 days a week,
Okay.
at night
Yep.
generally, and then I'll hit the plunge as well. But I hit that in the morning. My daughter, she's consistent every day with the plunge. So we work out at 6 a.m.
Oh, that's
together, or
awesome.
she works out. I kind of coach her,
Yeah.
and then she does the plunge, and it's hard for me to be like, I like to think about this idea of like discipline buckets, and you only have
Mm-hmm.
so much discipline in your bucket.
100%.
And in general, dude, I consider myself a relatively disciplined person with nutrition, with sleep, with hydration, with workouts. But sometimes when it comes like sauna or plunge, I got to really like inspire myself to do it. And it's something that I know I need to seek more, but I try and hit the plunge multiple days a week, but I have not been able to do it every day. I was doing it every day for like 2 months, and I've just fallen off every single day. So I got to give myself a little pep talk, I think.
I get it, man. I get it. Yeah, I love it too. I don't cold plunge on a regular basis, but I'm in a sauna probably about 4 days a week, I would say. I try to be minimum because I love it. The heat on my joints, man. It's been an amazing thing. Last time I went to the games in 2021 as a master's athlete, like I was in the sauna religiously, and I felt like that was one of the biggest differences for me.
Dude. Now, the next thing we need you to do is go find a coach and get on the mats. I'm telling you, bro. Oh, when you first got introduced to like the idea of CrossFit and like complexity and whatever, and you're like, oh, you're all in, you go tell all your friends about it, et cetera. That's kind of the way I've been in jiu-jitsu, and many people have been for years though. Like, bro, when you start unlocking these techniques and these ideas, maybe one day I'll get you to try it. Maybe after a few more of these type of conversations, I'll get you to set up a one-on-one.
That's right. Hey, you never know. I wouldn't count it out.
Man, it's the next sport for you. Well, brother, I really appreciate your time. It's been great catching up. I know that you got we got the CrossFit Games coming up in the near future. We'll see when this episode releases. But dude, any kind of closing remarks or ready to rock and roll?
I think we covered it all for today, man. I look forward to the next time we get together. Oh, I will mention I kind of left that comment that I made early in our conversation open when I said reached out to CrossFit, had a podcast called Athlete to Athlete. CrossFit did say, hey, let's try something, and we have a podcast called More Than Fitness. And I got a bunch of great people, Jason Khalipa included in that list, that got us going with our show. So tune into that, folks, if you're interested in more longer format interviews with some of these athletes and some of the heads of the sport that call the shots. So More Than Fitness.
More Than Fitness. All right. Well, thank you everyone for listening. Make sure you check out the previous shows. Leave us a rating, leave us a review, and have a great day.